Today we're going to do the story of Joseph. And that story is in Genesis, starting with chapter 37 and goes all the way through to chapter 49 in your Bible. And in the Spark Bible, it starts on page 48. This is a story with a lot of parts, but it does take us back to the desert. Now remember when we talked about Jacob? Jacob had 12 sons. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Zebulon, Benjamin, Joseph, and Issachar. Of these 12 sons, Joseph was Jacob's favorite. He was so favored by his father that his father bought him a very expensive coat made out of beautiful fabric. And this made all of his brothers jealous. Joseph also wasn't expected to work as hard as his brothers. They were often sent out into the fields with the animals, and Joseph would stay home with his father. But one day, Jacob sent Joseph out into the fields to check on his brothers. And when the brothers saw him coming, they decided they wanted to get rid of him because they were just sick of him. They thought he was too spoiled. But the eldest brother, Reuben, convinced them. He said, instead of killing Joseph, let's just get rid of him. So when Joseph came to them, they beat him up and they threw him in a well. And they took his coat and they killed an animal and put animal blood all over it and told their father that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal out in the fields. And Jacob was so very sad. But in the meantime, the other brothers saw a caravan of traders coming, a caravan that was on its way to Egypt. And they sold Joseph to that caravan for 20 pieces of silver. The caravan crossed the desert and went into Egypt, where they sold Joseph to the Pharaoh to work as a slave. In the Pharaoh's house, Joseph got a reputation amongst the other servants for someone who could interpret their dreams. They would come to him with odd stories, and he would tell them what they meant. The Pharaoh started to be troubled by some very, very bad dreams. He was dreaming of starving animals and angry people. And he said, bring Joseph to me so he can tell me what my dreams mean. The Pharaoh told Joseph that he had a dream where there were 7 healthy animals and then there were 7 sick animals. And then he had a dream where there were bushels and bushels of grain for the people. And then there were times when there was no grain and the crops withered in the fields. Joseph told the Pharaoh, he said, this means that you're going to have 7 years of good harvests and healthy animals. And then there are going to be 7 years of famine and drought. And there's not going to be enough food. So during the 7 years of plenty, you should stock up so that you're ready for the 7 years where there's not enough. The Pharaoh took Joseph's advice and he put Joseph in charge of that. He said to Joseph, you're going to be in charge of storing the grain and keeping track of everything so that when the famine comes, we'll have enough. Well, the famine did come. And when the famine came, it didn't just come to Egypt. It came to the whole area back in the land where Joseph's brothers lived, back where Jacob had settled with his people, back in Hebron. And those people came to Egypt to get help because they knew that they had stored grain there. And the Pharaoh was willing to help people. And among those people that came were some of Joseph's brothers. led by Reuben, and they waited their turn to meet with Joseph to receive their grain. They didn't recognize Joseph because now Joseph looked like an Egyptian. He was grown up, his hair was different, he wore Egyptian style clothes, and he was a very powerful man. As far as they knew, they had sold their brother many years before into slavery, but Joseph recognized them. He gave them their grain, and he told them, he said, go back and get the rest of your family. And I'm going to keep the youngest one here with me to make sure you come back. Well, they did what they were told because they were glad to have the grain. And the rest of the brothers came. And when the brothers came, Joseph revealed himself as their brother. And they threw themselves down and they begged his forgiveness. They thought they would be thrown into prison or maybe even executed. But Joseph went to them. He went to Reuben, the eldest, and he said, I forgive you. I want you to come here with all of your family. And remember, when we talk about these kind of families, it's not just a couple of people, it's a lot of people. Bring your families and come and live in Egypt, because in Egypt we have plenty to go around. So they did that. They went back and they got their families and they brought them. And they stayed and they prospered. And they grew and grew and grew in number until eventually the Pharaoh, the good Pharaoh, who had helped Joseph, he was gone. And a new Pharaoh took his place. And after Joseph was gone, but his descendants were there, the new Pharaoh was afraid of the Hebrews. He forgot all the good that Joseph had done, and he enslaved them because he was afraid they were going to take over from the Egyptians that were there. And that is how we get to Moses.